All right, I got the recorder started. The audio is good. Video should be good too. And we have another 5 seconds before the class starts. All right, so I'm gonna get the class started. Um, yeah, people can walk in or out anytime they want to, but we'll get the class started. So what we'll do today, I forgot to upload the video from Monday until just right now, so you kind of have to watch that one too. So on Monday we talked about in this class, we talked about the final exam from last semester. So that's something that you probably want to watch, okay? Because it does tell you about the final exam from last semester and how to answer those questions. It is all recorded. I just forgot to upload it. So if you have any questions about that, you can come to my office hour, which is 8 to 9 every day. That includes tomorrow and then the day after tomorrow. And then also on Monday, I don't have an office hour from 8 to 9 because that's going to be part of your final exam time. So the final exam for this class is on December 15th, which is next Monday from 8 to 10 a.m. Okay, so it's going to be a 2 hour long exam, and you probably want to make sure that you wake up, at in time to come to the final exam because it is 1 hour before the usual lecture time starts. So it's from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. So I cannot overemphasize the time of the final exam. So do we have any questions about the final exam? Yep. Um, well, if they cannot make it, this is not new. Okay, this is not something that I just disclosed. I believe I talked about this last week as well. So I cannot make the exam postponed to Wednesday. Tuesday, maybe. Later on Monday, maybe, but not Wednesday. But this is nothing new. I mean, they should have told me about, the time, before. Okay. So read the syllabus regarding, the policy about, taking the exam, at a later time. Basically it is not, cannot be really arranged. Um, in the extreme case that somebody actually cannot make it to the exam, I can look at each individual case, but I cannot make any promises. Okay, because this is I have recording of when I disclosed the final exam time, and that was last Wednesday. Okay, and nobody told me anything about not being able to make it over the entire week. So, yep. So when people are not paying attention and to not take this into consideration, I really can't do much about it. All right. So with that said, we are going to go over the homework assignment that was due earlier today. And that would be the final piece, that you need for preparing for the final exam, because structures was not in the previous semester. So that means your final exam, may not be the same as the exam that we talked about on Monday, because it will also include structures. So that means this homework assignment is actually quite important when you are preparing for the final exam. All right, so this is the code. And just from a quick glance of the submissions, I can see some problems already. Some people obviously did not handle the function call, which is this line over here. So we'll go over the solution, and the solution once again will be in one of the spreadsheets that is available to you through the Google Drive. All right. So do we have any questions about this particular program before we get started with the trace? Does anyone have any questions about the code of the program, like not understanding what a particular line means or what to do with that line. We don't have any questions. All right. Well, without any questions, we're gonna get started with this one. Okay. So as usual, okay, I will just kind of copy and paste this into something that has line numbers, and then I'll take a snapshot of that, graphically, so that we can look at the algorithm while tracing the algorithm at the same time. So we copy this and see if I have mouse pad already open. Yes, I do. All right. So we'll go ahead and start a new window over here, paste it. And this one is a little bit long. Okay, I'm not sure. I think we can still do it, just barely. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and copy and paste it like so. All right. So now I go back to my share drive, which you all have access to. So this is the share drive or the shared folder, and I'm creating a new document here. And all of these documents, okay, all of these spreadsheets, you can, make a copy, annotate, print it out, and bring it with you in the final exam. Okay, so anything that is on paper is okay in the final exam, but collaboration is not okay in the final exam in any way. So we'll go ahead and create this and change the date. Today is 2025, 12/10. There we go. All right. So now we can go ahead and trace this. The first line to execute is on line 18, but before that, we have to make, create the headings for all the columns. So comments is not really needed in this case because we do not have any conditions to evaluate. There are no control structures. So we just kind of shrink this one. Line number obviously is going to be important, but the first row, as usual, we don't have global variables anymore. So the precondition has nothing to say about global variables. And then we start execution on line 18. Line 18 doesn't do anything, but line 19 start to do something that is kind of important. So line 19 is the definition of the only local variable var1 in this particular program. So the way we do that is going to be creating the four columns, okay? So the first question is, why do we need four columns to create variable var1? Because it has four items nested in it. And that's because var1 is a struct y. And if you look into struct y, on line 7, the first member of y is member A, but member A itself is also a struct x. So when you look at the definition of struct x has a member A also. So that means that we have a nested kind of thing. So the way I would do it here is kind of look at it from a more structural perspective. So if you want to refer to var1, it is referring to all four columns, okay? Column C, D, E, F, those are all var1. Now this part, I don't need your trace to look exactly like this, okay? But this is my way of explaining, how var1 looks like, okay? It is occupying all four columns. These two columns together would be var1.a. So we go format and then merge cells. And this is var1.a, which means column C and column D are both used to represent member A of var1, because member A of var1, or according to line 7, is by itself a struct X. And the struct X has two items, which is integer A and integer B as members. So that's why, when we get down to the third row here, we now have var1.a.a, which is member A of member A of var1. Okay, and then the next one would be var1.a.b. So this is basically member B of member A of var1. So are we okay with these notations? Do we understand that we have a member of var1, member A in this case, which itself is a structure, so it has its own members. Are we doing okay so far with that concept? Okay, so now we can do the same thing with the next two columns, which are column E and column F. So now we go to Format, and then we merge the cells, and then we go like var1.b. So this would be var1 dot, whoops, var1 dot b dot a. It is member A of member B of var1, and this would be var1 dot b dot b. All right, so is this notation okay? Does everybody understand how each column is a part of var1? We good? Okay. So from your perspective, if you turn in your homework assignment without these two rows, it's fine, okay? As long as I can tell that you know which column maps to the member A of var1, which one maps to member B of member A of var1, and so on, it's fine. So that means that in your submission, if you have these four columns, labeled as these, you'll be fine. Do we have any questions about those, how those four columns are labeled and why they are labeled that way? So we good? Okay, all right. So I'm going to shrink the columns a little bit because I need some more space on the right-hand side. And because this is a local variable that is not initialized, all four columns will have question marks, okay, because they are unknown to begin with. So now we move on to line 20 to line 23. So those are not really particularly exciting. So because once you label column C, D, E, F correctly, line 20 is just looking at, okay, where do I find member A of var1? We go like, oh, column C. Okay, so column C it is. And then line 21 is going to change column D to 3, and then line 22 is changing column E to 4, and then line 23 is changing column F to a 5. So we still doing okay so far? Okay, so the correct labeling of the column is the key, okay, because now you know which one is, where. And now we can go to line 25, which is the only line that is actually significant because this time we have to call swap. So the first question is, do we need a return line number or do we need return info? Which one do we need? Return line number. That is correct because swap as a function does not return a value. When you look at line 11 of the code, it has a void as a return type, so that means it does not return a value. That's one clue. The second clue is when you look at line 25, when we get back from swap, do we have anything else to do on line 25? Do we have an assignment or some addition or multiplication or whatever to do? There's nothing to do on line 25, so that means return line number is the way that we need it. Okay, so that means on line 25, we have to allocate a column for return line number, and when it does return, we want it to return to line 26. So this is how we can let the function, which in this case is swap, understand where it needs to go back to when it is done. And now we need three more columns for the function call, at least two more at this point, and then maybe one more on the next line. Because now we look at the parameters of swap on line 11. It has x and y as its parameters. So right away, we know that we have to allocate um, column H, which is the leftmost available column for parameter x, and then column I, which is the next available column for y as a parameter. The next question is, what do I put here in this particular cell? In other words, um, how do we pass argument var1.a.b to function swap for parameter x? That is the question. Okay, we know those two are matching because they are positionally wise, they are the same. Okay, they're both the first one. So the question now is, what kind of parameter is x? There are only two types of parameters in this class. is either by value or by reference. So which one is this one? It's by reference, okay? And how do we know it is by reference? The ampersand, that is correct. Okay, so the ampersand signifies that parameter x is passed by reference. So how are those two ways different? If I'm passing by reference, what do I put here in this particular cell? It refers to the column. Okay, so we have a reference to which column? So which column does var1 dot a dot b specify? It would be column D. That is correct. Okay. And what about y? Oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong key. What about y? It's also passed by reference, but the argument that I specify, okay, so the difference between a parameter and an argument is from the perspective of the caller, which is line 25 in this case. A parameter is from the perspective of the function definition, which is on line 11, okay? So from the caller's perspective, the second argument is var1 dot b dot a. It is matching parameter 2, which is parameter y of the function. So what do we put in the cell that is currently highlighted? Reference to column which? Column E, that is correct, okay? Because column E is labeled as var1 dot b dot a, and that's exactly what we need to specify here, okay? Very good. And so we just go ahead and make this a little bit smaller because I need some more space here on the other side. So this is what line 25 is going to do. And then when we continue execution into swap, we get to line 11, doesn't do a single thing. When we get to line 12, we go like, oh, okay, we have a local variable t. So function swap needs its own local variable, which means, okay, now we need to allocate another column or whatever is the leftmost available column at this point, which is column J. So now we now label column J T, which is the name of the local variable. And because it is a local variable, starts with an unknown value. So from the quick glance at the submission of this homework assignment, some people, at least one, okay, I only took a look at one person did not, okay, do the execution of the function call, and no additional columns were allocated. So that's definitely going to have some points deducted. All right. So now we get to line 13. So when we get to line 13, which is a simple assignment statement, but the question is, what is X specifying? So you look up the rightmost column that is labeled X, which is column H. Column H says, hey, don't look at me, okay? I don't have a value for you, but I know who does, right? So that's what the reference is. So it's referencing column D, and column D says, yep, I do have a value of 3. So we now know that the right-hand side of line 13, the assignment statement, evaluates to 3 as a value. And now we need to determine, okay, but where do we store it? Because it is an assignment statement. The left-hand side of line 13 specifies T. We look up the columns and ask which column is labeled T right now, or the rightmost column that is labeled T. It is column J, and column J is a local variable, so it can take on a particular value. So the value of 3 goes here. And then we move on to line 14, okay? So line 14 is probably the most important line of the entire program because both sides of the assignment statements are using pass by reference parameters. So we'll start on the right-hand side. So the way we approach this entire program is no different from any other program, which is step by step. With an assignment statement, we evaluate the right-hand side, and then we evaluate the left-hand side. So on line 14, the right-hand side says Y. Okay, so we look up the rightmost column that is labeled Y, which is column I, and we say, do you have a value for me? Column I says, I don't have a value. I'm a reference. So now it refers to column E. Column E says, I do have a value, which is 4. So the right-hand side of line 14 evaluates to 4. Okay, now the question is, where do we store the value of 4 on line 14? Okay, Well, that's the left-hand side. The job of the left-hand side of an assignment is to specify where are we storing the value of the right-hand side. So on line 14, the left-hand side says x. Okay, so now you have to look up the column for that particular x. The rightmost column that is labeled x is column H, right? So column H says, don't store anything to me because I'm just a reference. Okay, so it is a pointer, okay? You can see it as a pointer, as in like I'm just pointing somewhere else. So it's pointing to column D, which means we are supposed to change column D with a value of whatever the right-hand side is. The right-hand side is column E, which has a value of 4, but we are going to column D to update column D. So column D is the one that is updated with a value of 4. Do we have any questions about row 18 of the trace? Because this is the crux of the entire homework assignment. Okay, everything that we set up is, you know, whether you understand the concepts correctly or not. Okay, it boils down to line 18 and also the other columns that we set up here. But the effect of setting up columns H, I, and J, is culminated to line row 18 of the trace. So do we have any questions about row 18 of the trace? And let me highlight the whole row here just so that people can understand what I'm asking. Do we have any questions about this row? Yes. Hmm? You mean column H? This is all we do on row 18. The reference itself does not change. Yep, the reference itself does not change because the reference itself is just saying, I am just a reference. Do not change me. Yep. So that one, we talked about this, I think last Monday maybe, because I gave you guys the 4 combinations, right? Pass by value to pass by value, pass by value to pass by reference, pass by reference to pass by value, and then pass by reference to pass by reference. So that particular example on, I think it was last Monday, talked about the combination. And in that particular example, we update something that is passed by reference, but it does not change the reference itself. Okay, so this means, kind of watching the videos, especially the Monday ones, because the Monday ones are the ones where attendance is optional. Those are really, really important. Okay, because then you have to kind of jot down the notes and relate what you have to do here to the sample programs that we have talked about. So the key is the reference itself. If a parameter is passed by reference, you are guaranteed that this does not change. This column here does not change. Is that okay? All right. So as I talk about these things, I can see that no one is taking notes. So I'm assuming that you guys all have photographic memory and you completely under these concepts already because you took a class like this somewhere before, sometime before. Because if I were you, I would not be able to remember that. Okay. So that is the importance of taking notes. And I look at the entire class, except for one person, nobody actually has a notebook ready to take notes. So I just want to point that out. Okay, it is an observation, um, and it does not match what I had to do as a college student. But you can say that, Tack, but you're ancient. Back in your times, you don't have AI to help you. That is correct. I didn't even have the internet to help me at that time. So maybe I had needs to take notes and you guys don't. Okay, let's move on to line 13, 15 then. Okay, so here's line 15, and line 15 is right here. So line 15 is kind of the reverse of line 13. Okay, so this time the right hand side refers to T, and the column that is labeled T, the rightmost column that is labeled T is column J. Column J says, okay, I can provide the value. It is 3. So now we are resolved with the right-hand side on line 15. Now we have to determine, since it's an assignment statement, where are we storing that 3? So we look at the assignment statement. The left-hand side of line 15 refers to Y. So we look up the rightmost column that is labeled Y, which is column I. Column I is saying that don't change me because I am a reference. Okay. So instead of changing this column, we change what the column is referring to, which is column E. So column E ends up with the value of 3 when we execute line 15, and this is row 19 of the trace. Do we have any questions about this part? No questions? Okay. So when this is all done, when we get to line 16, because this is a function, so everything that we set up, all the columns that we set up for this particular function call, they all need to go away. They need to be deallocated so that those columns can be reused later if we have another function call. So that means column G, H, I, and J, they should all be deallocated at the same time. Okay. So that means, I'm going to have to copy and paste a few things over here. So copy and paste, and then we have copy and then paste, and then we use a strikeout to cross out everything. But before we do that, I also have to copy the return line number, which is line 26 over here, because this tells me that the next line I need to go back to is line 26. That's the whole purpose of the return line number column, is to remind me when the function is done, where do we go to continue execution. So with all that done, now I can safely deallocate these 4 columns. So in this class, I just use strike out on inside the spreadsheet to indicate that columns G, H, I, and J are all available again. And we continue execution on line 26, which is a return 0, and that really doesn't do anything from our perspective. But in the previous exam or in the previous semester, I would also deallocate everything in main, which means that these 4 columns will also be deallocated. Since I have not been doing that consistently this semester, we just go like, well, we don't have to worry about that, and then we get to post. But technically speaking, we do deallocate these 4 columns also at the end of your main. Okay. So do we have any questions about this particular trace? So there are a few key points of this particular trace. Okay. One key point has to do with var1. Okay. What exactly is var1? So when you look at the code of the program, var1 has a type of struct y. So that means you have to look into the definition of struct y. Struct y says I have 2 members. I have member A and I have member B. But member A itself is also a structure. It's a struct X, so you have to look at what is a struct X. Struct X says, I also have 2 members, okay? I have member A and member B. So that's why, when we look at var1 itself, it occupies 4 columns, C, D, E, and F. But when you look at when you only refer to var1.a, it is only occupying 2 columns. When you look at var1.b, it's only occupying 2 columns. But each one, var1.a, is also a structure. It has its own member A and member B based on the definition of struct X. So when you look at member A of var1, that singles out a single column, which is column C. So that's one important part of this particular sample program. The other part that is really important too is when you specify the argument that goes into something that is passed by reference, it doesn't matter whether it is an individual variable that is of the integer type or it is just one of the columns corresponding to a variable that is a structure. It doesn't matter. As long as we know which column it is referring to, you can pass by reference. So that's the second part that is really important. And obviously, the third part that is important is what do we do when we have something like this on line 14? So when we have something like this on line 14, we do not modify the parameter itself. We modify what the parameter is referring to, and only that. Okay, so that's the other part that is also very important. All right. So I've just identified all the key points of this particular homework assignment. Do we have any questions about any one of these key points? We good? All right. Yes. You can do that. Just write int y, under, after line 8. Yeah, yeah. So I can show you that too. So let me go back to the actual text file here. That's all you need to do. Yep, you can, and in fact, you can put int y any place. You can put it before B. You can put it before A. That will change the positioning of the columns, but you can put it anywhere. hmm In other words, a structure is not limited to only integers, or just structures. You can have a mixture. hmm Yep, yep. So if this was the case, okay, so let me just kind of pretend that this is the case, for the actual program. So even though we never use that particular column, um, I'm just deciding, well, you guys have the source code of the program, so I can just kind of close this one. All right, so let's go ahead and replicate this. Okay, so we'll go duplicate this. Okay, so this is just the hypothetical scenario of the program being changed to include int y like this. Okay, or if you want it to be tricky, you can put an int y somewhere between a and b. Okay, so let's do that one instead. So let's say we make it kind of tricky. Y is between a and b. So in that case, what you do is you insert one more column on this side. Oh, okay, wrong side. Okay, Control Z, undo. Should be on the right hand side. There we go. So in this case, you would have var1 dot y being here, and it is by itself a column. It has no member of its own, so you don't have to go for the third row to specify, oh, okay, I have members too, and these are the columns of the member. Okay, is that okay? Now, obviously, because I shifted the columns, so that means the referencing of this column would be the wrong one because now um, it would refer to, let's see, it would refer to column F instead of column E in this case. So, but I'm not making those adjustments because I just want to illustrate what you should look at or what it looks like when var1 or when struct y has a y between member A and member B. Okay, all right. So that's a good question. Any other questions about this particular program or anything related to this program that you might have some questions about? No questions? Okay, all right. So if there are no questions about this one, I will just make up some additional programs as a practice for the duration of this lecture. And by the way, this is our last lecture. So that means if you do have any questions, you can either ask it in class or you can come to my office hour or send me an email and ask those questions before next Monday, when we have our final exam. Okay, all right. All right, so let's go ahead and just make some mm, slight changes to this particular program. So I'm going to take out this, okay, but I will have some additional functions here. So that makes the program a little bit longer and a little bit harder to kind of scroll through. So I cannot really do the same static, image anymore. So let's say we have another void function here. And this particular void function says, process. Okay, that's all you're going to say, and it will say struct x. This is its own parameter x. Let's not use x here. Let's use let's use a and b. Okay, let's make it confusing. So there we go. And then this one is going to call swap. Okay, we'll call swap from here, and we'll say swap a dot a with b dot b. Okay, or if you want to make it even more confusing, we'll do it this way. Okay, b dot a. Okay, and then we'll change this function call. Instead of doing a swap directly here, we are going to say process. Okay, and this will process var1 dot b comma var1 dot a, like that. Okay, so I just made some minor changes to the program. We are now practicing how to pass an entire structure by reference. The concept was already discussed in one of the lectures. Okay, so when we hit line 29, hopefully you will remember that particular lecture because we actually have talked about that already. The mechanism of passing by reference of an entire array is identical to passing by reference for an entire structure. Okay, so when we hit line 29, hopefully you will start to remember some of that stuff. All right, so this is the new program. And what we'll do this time is we are going to use another sheet here to capture the entire program. So I'm going to do a Control A, Control C, and then paste it here. I think it will lose all the indentations. Yep, yep, that's expected. What should I do? I can just manually put the indentations back in. So I have a curiosity question. It is not a judgment. Since most of you are not taking notes, how do you remember all this stuff? Go back to the video. Okay, okay, that's good. I can see that. But that means you need to take a second pass of the material to write it down, which is okay. Most people actually might need a second pass anyway. Okay, well, okay, that's a good answer. So let me ask a second question. Once again, it is not a judgment, it is really just a curiosity. So for people who are using the phone during the class time, you don't have to answer the question, but I'm curious. Are you using the phone to capture like timestamps of the lecture, or are you using the phone because you're texting with somebody else or doing something unrelated to the class on the phone? Once again, it is not a judgment, it is just me being curious. Hmm? Okay, I can see that. Okay, and I have a phone like this too with a stylus. Yep. So it's really quite handy, because you can just jot down some notes. But I also know that you have a physical notebook too. So yeah. Hmm? Oh, you forgot to bring your pen. Okay. Yeah, but the phone would do fine too. It's just a little bit less tactile. You cannot write nearly as neatly, yep, as on the piece of paper. Yep. Okay. And I think you're taking notes on the computer. So may I ask you what kind of program are you using to take notes? Oh, okay. All right. Yep. Okay. Well, that's good. For anyone who's interested in taking notes on the computer, because it is actually an effective way to do things, one particular tool that I have that I'm playing with right now, okay, is Obsidian note taking. Okay. So if you have not used Obsidian, you can look into it. There are plenty of YouTube videos online that talks about how to use Obsidian. You can use Obsidian to write an entire novel if that is your thing, but you can also use it to take notes. One thing that is good about Obsidian is it uses Markdown, which means once you learn how to enter math equations, you can actually use Obsidian to take notes in a math class with all the equations and whatnot. But it does take some time to become familiar with all the math notations, but it is a really useful way to take notes. You can link concepts. Okay, that's one of the strengths of using Obsidian is you can link concepts. You can use tags. Okay, now all of you know hashtag from social media context, but when you're taking notes electronically, tags are also really useful. It allows you to quickly find items that you're looking for. Okay, the other thing that Obsidian is really good for is you can use the square bracket notation or the double square bracket. So let's just say that you have a particular concept that you can think, okay, this is important. Okay, I need a document just to talk about it. Okay, so you can do something like this by reference close bracket, close bracket. So what that would do is it would create a quote unquote dangling note, okay, which means it doesn't exist yet, okay? The document called byref would not have existed at that point of time, but the tool will remind you and go like, hey, this is something that you made a note before that seems to be important. You might need to create a document just to talk about it. Okay. In other words, you can create hyperlinks on the fly. And if you don't have enough time to really create a document that it links to begin with, it will remind you later on and say, hey, you think this is important. I think you might need to click on this little gray dot on the graph and turn it into its actual document. So that allows you to take notes when you go like, okay, I'm going to backfill this detail later on. And that will remind you to go like, yeah, these are all the little empty slots that you have to backfill. I find that to be particularly helpful. Okay. Um, so Obsidian is free. Okay. Unless you want to put all your content in the cloud, then they will charge you for a subscription fee. But if you put everything on your own computer, which is easy to organize, okay, everything is just a folder. So that means if you want to back up everything, you think, okay, just in case I get out of my car, I drop my computer, and then I drove over my own computer. Okay, then all your content is gone. Zip up the whole folder, upload it to your Google Drive. Now you have a backup. That's all it takes to back up your stuff. Okay, so I highly recommend people to at least take a look at what Obsidian can do. Okay, if you are into taking notes by using a computer, um, I think this is one of the better tools. The other one is Joplin, but I think comparing those two, I would go with Obsidian. You can also write your own extensions, for all kinds of purposes. So it's very extendable, um, and you can organize your notes, in a really, good way. Very organized, good for organization and also searching for stuff because of the tagging ability. So just as a side note. Okay. All right. So getting back to this program here. So this tab here, which is Sheet 2, is really just the program itself. I'm going to label it as such. So this is the code, and then we'll trace the code on the next tab here. So this is our trace. There we go. And now I need to make this one always on top. Okay, so always on top like that, because I need to refer to it from time to time. And then we have the same setup, comments, line number. This part has not changed. Nothing to say about the precondition. The position of main has changed. It is now on line 22. On line 23, that has not changed either. So var1 is still taking up all four columns. var1.a is taking up two columns. var1.b is taking up the other two columns. var1.a.a is referring to this exact column. var1.a.b is taking up this column. var1.b.a is this column. var1.b.b is this column over here. And they're all question marks. Okay, question mark. Oops, wrong key. Question mark, question mark, question mark. And then this is how we merge. Okay, so if you have been observing how I do this, you go to the format menu, and then you go to merge cells. Both will work fine, okay, because we are not merging vertically, or there's no choice. So we just merge all, okay, and then you select these two, do exactly the same thing, merge cells, and then you look at these two, do exactly the same thing. Just visually speaking, I like it to be displayed like this, okay? If you want it to be even more prominent, like which column is what, you can now select all four of these, and then you can use the grid tool. You turn on the grid tool, so now it is even more clear, how the thing is organized. Okay, so these are all ways for you to visualize, how a structure that has a nested structure inside would look like in terms of how it uses the columns. Okay, so what we refer to as columns in this class is actually memory in CISP 360. Okay, so in CISP 360, when your professor says, okay, this variable is going to take up memory locations like this, the memory locations are essentially what we have here as columns. Okay, so we just kind of we use as little space as possible, okay, because we got other stuff that we need columns for. And then line 24, 25, 26, and 27 are still doing what they're supposed to be doing. Two here, three, a four, and then a five. So that has not changed. So on line 29, now we have a question, okay, because we are calling process, which is on line 18. So let me kind of move everything back here so you can see better. There we go. So we still need a return line number only. We don't need a return info just because um, it is it's a void function. We have a void as a return type, and also there's nothing else on line 28 to continue to do when the function returns. So that means a return line number is going to be just fine. Okay, so I just messed up I typed in the wrong window. There we go. So return line number is going to be whatever is after process, which is line 30. So that part is pretty easy, okay, because that's just there's nothing else to do on line 29. All right. So when you look at process, it has two parameters. One is parameter A and one is parameter B. So you might notice that we have already used A and B as the names of the members, both of structure Y and structure X. There is no problem with reusing the same names for parameters or local variables. The reason is if you refer to a member name, it is after a dot. If you refer to parameters, it is without a dot before it. So because of the dot being either on the right-hand side or the left-hand side of the name, we know exactly which A is referring to what. Okay, so when we get to line 19, I'll explain that. So we do have two parameters. One is parameter A and one is parameter B. So these are the two names here, and that's why we allocate column H and column I accordingly to handle those two parameters. But you can also see these parameters are both passed by reference. So you can see the ampersand here and the ampersand here. So that means both of these are going to be references to columns. But now we have a problem because we are specifying var1.b to specify parameter A of process. In other words, this is the argument on line 29, var1.b, and this is the actual parameter A of the function. So you go like, so what do we do? Okay, because we know it is going to be a reference of column. So the question is, are we going to write something like this? Okay, are we going to write this is a reference to columns D to F or what? Okay, so as it turns out in C++, a reference can only refer to a single column. You cannot refer to a range of columns. So that means we cannot specify something like this. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, we cannot do that. We cannot say it is a reference to column E to column F. Only the first one, exactly. Okay, so we talked about this in a previous lecture that a reference can only refer to a single column, and in any case, you refer to the first column of whatever is specifying the location. So now we go back to line 29. We look at the actual argument var1.b. Okay, so we look up the diagram and go like, okay, this is var1.b. It takes column E and column F, and then we ask the second question, which is which one is the first column? First column being the one on the left hand side. It's column E, right? So we just specify column E in this case. So this part is super important. Okay, you only specify one single column. So now with B, it is also easy because we use var1.a, which is column C and D, to specify parameter B. So parameter B can only refer to the first column, which is column C in this case. Okay, so I'm gonna finish this. Okay, that's done. And then we continue execution in process, which is starting on line 18. Line 18 really doesn't do a single thing. So now we get to line 19, which is also kind of confusing in a way, okay? But we'll take a look. We'll do it step by step. First of all, it is a function call to swap. So that means that we are going to have to allocate three more columns at this point. The three columns will be corresponding to one column for the return line number. So the return line number is going to be line 20. Another column will be handling parameter A and parameter B. All right. So at this point, um, you have to look at line 19 and you look at the first argument. Okay. So this is the first argument, which is saying, okay, we need to access member B of parameter A. Huh? I believe those are A and B. Why do you think it is X and Y? Yes, you're correct. You are correct because we're calling swap. Thank you. Alrighty. That's my add block asking me to pay. All right, so you are correct. This is parameter X of swap and parameter Y of swap. Thank you. All right. So the question is on line 19, what is the argument to supply to parameter X? It is A dot B. So now you have to ask, what is A dot B specifying here? We read it exactly left to right, so we have to resolve what the A is representing. So let me highlight the A because there's a whole bunch of A here. This A here, okay? That's the first one that we have to resolve. What is that A referring to? Well, we refer because it doesn't have a dot to its left-hand side and it's the starting point, right? So that means we have to look up the column that is labeled A, the rightmost column that is labeled A. The rightmost column that is labeled A is column H. Okay, so column H is referring to column E. Okay, that's how much we know. However, because we know parameter A is a reference to a struct X, and from the context of parameter A is a pass by reference to a struct X, we now understand that this is only referring to the first column of the type of a struct X. Let me say that sentence one more time, okay? Now we understand a reference to column E is a reference to the first column of a struct X. So now you look at column E, you go like, okay, if I treat column E as the first column of a struct X, that means the entire thing would be column E and column F. Column E being member A of the structure, and column F being member B of the same structure. So now when we understand that part and then we finish reading the entire thing, so now when we read the dot B, it means okay, since column A not column A, but since this A here is referring to both column E and F because we know the type, this one is now designated and go like, I don't need both columns. I just need the column that maps to member B of the entire structure. So that singles out, the that singles out column F in this case. So that means X as a parameter to swap is really a reference only to column F. Yep, to column E, D. No, because I intentionally messed around with you. So because on line 29, the first argument is specifying var1.b. So now we look at var1.b. var1.b itself occupies both column E and column F. But when we pass it by reference, we can only specify the first column. And that's why when we get to when we pass when we get to the function that is calling, it is known only as a reference to column E. Is that okay? And then on line 19, when we specify A dot B, the A is now referring to column H, which is saying I can tell you where to find the first column of the entire structure X, right? But then the dot B says I don't need the entire structure. I just need the member B of the column of, excuse me, I just need member B of the struct X that starts on column E. And therefore, we only pass a reference to column F in this case to parameter X of swap. Okay, so, all right, so let me shrink some columns here because I need more space. All right, so let's look at Y. Okay, so what do we use to specify Y? Okay, this is the argument that specifies parameter Y over here. Okay, it starts with a B. Okay, so now we say, okay, what B are we looking at? We are looking at the rightmost column that is labeled B, which is column I. Okay, column I says, I can tell you the first column of whatever it is referring to, but I don't know how big that thing is. Well, it actually does, because when we look at the, okay, it's off screen right now, so let me bring it back so that we can have the context to talk about this. There we go. All right. So because B is a reference of a struct X, so even though when we look up column I, it says, I can only tell you where the first column is of whatever thing I'm supposed to reference, but because we know exactly what B is supposed to be referencing, it's supposed to be referencing a struct X, so now we know, okay, that's cool, okay, we just know that column C is the first column of a struct X, which is correct because var1.a occupies both column C and D. Column C is member A, column D is member B of the struct X that parameter B is referring to. Is that okay? All right. So now we have to pass, we now specify, but I don't need the entire structure. I just need member A of the structure that that parameter B is referring to. So the structure the parameter B is referring to is this particular part here, and we just need member A of that thing, so that would just be column C. So that's why parameter Y of swap is a reference to only column C in this case, like so. So the rest of this trace is going to be very similar to the one that we did before. So when we get to swap, which is now on line 11, that doesn't do anything, but line 12 still needs to allocate one additional column for T, which starts with an unknown value. When we get to line 13, so when we get to line 13, there's no actual additional complexity anymore. Okay, the additional complexity has to do with inside process. How do we call swap? That is the additional complexity of this program compared to your homework assignment. So at this point, when we get to line 13 says, okay, it's an assignment statement, evaluate the right-hand side first. The right-hand side says, okay, I need to know what is the value of x as an expression. So we look up X, or which column has a label of X, or which rightmost column has a label of X. It is column K. Column K says, don't look at me, look at column F. Column F says, yep, I do have a value of 5. Okay, so that means on line 13, 5 is the right-hand side of line 13. So this X here resolved to a value of 5. So now we go like, okay, where do we store the 5? We store the 5 to local variable t, which is the rightmost column that is labeled t, which is column m. Okay, so this column m here now gets a value of 5. And let me shrink the column because it's way too wide for what it needs. There we go. Okay, getting back. And now we move on to line 14. So line 14 is really kind of doing the same thing that it did in the program before, because the right hand side is, okay, we need to know what is y. Okay, what is the value of y, which is the right hand side of line 14. So we look up the rightmost column that is labeled y, which is column L. Column L says, don't look at me, I know where to find the value, but I don't have it. So we look up column C as a result. Column C says I have a value of 2. So we now store the 2 to the left-hand side. In other words, we just resolved the right-hand side of the assignment is a value of 2. Now we look at the left-hand side. So the left-hand side is X, okay? We look up the rightmost column that is labeled X, which is column K. Column K says, don't modify me, okay? Because I'm a reference. So you never change a reference, okay? So column K says, don't change me, but if you need to change someone, change column F. So column F is the actual one that is now changed to a value of 2, okay? Using the wrong side, wrong window here. Okay, so this is now changed to a 2 because of line 14. When we get to line 15, the right-hand side is T. We look up the rightmost column that is labeled T. That's column M. Column M has a value of 5. The question is, where do we store the 5? We store the 5 to Y. The rightmost column that is labeled Y is column L. It says, don't change me. I'm just a reference. It's referring to column C. So column C is the one that is now changed to 5. Is that okay? So now we move on to line 16. Line 16 says, okay, this is the conclusion of the entire execution of this function. So all the columns that we need here, but before we do anything like that, we have to say, okay, the next line is going to be line 20 because of this. So now we can now deallocate everything. Go here, this one goes here. So everything get deallocated at the end of a function call. So all of these are now struck out. We get to line 20. Line 20 says, I'm also the end of a function. I'm the end of function process. So that means everything that we allocated earlier for function process also needs to be deallocated. But before we do that, we take a note that we have to continue execution on line 30. So we put the line 30 here so that we don't forget. And then we deallocate the 3 columns corresponding to the function call or the invocation of process. So we now strike all of those out. Now we continue execution on line 30. Line 30 says return 0 in main. So typically in this particular semester, we just do a post right after, and we are done. Do we have any questions about this particular trace? So the main difference between this one and your homework assignment is I pass a member of a structure, which is by itself also a structure, by reference to another function that is expecting a structure passed by reference and a structure that is also passed by reference. So that's the twist to this one. It doesn't change any of the rules that we have talked about. Okay, it is just a different application of a combination of the rules. Are we still doing okay so far with this particular sample program? We're, I'm seeing a lot of, I'm seeing some people nodding their heads almost to the point that it's going to fall off. Do you guys have any questions? Because I am running out of material to talk about. So if you need clarifications of what are we actually doing or how did we do it on a particular row of a trace, now would be a good time to do it. Do we have any questions? We don't have any questions. All right. Then I will move on to, yes, go ahead, please. Yeah, yeah, the exam. Hmm? I just uploaded it today. Yeah, I forgot to upload it on Monday. Yep. All right. Okay, that's it. Okay, so how are you going to prepare for the exam? Hmm? Review the videos. Okay, so how do you review the videos? Okay, okay. Yes. Okay, so that's a very good point. So that means, all of these files are available to you. Okay, so in addition to all the videos, because I know, you may not want to recreate all the traces on your own because it's kind of tedious, all of these are available. and they're all dated based on the day of the lecture. So that means when you look up the video, you just match up the date, and you can also match up the spreadsheet that captures the traces of that particular day. So when you open up any one of these, okay, in case you don't know yet, because I've been talking about this, but some people may not notice that. So let's just say that you find one to be particularly helpful. Let's say it's this one and the particular sheet. Okay, let's pick one. Okay, let's just say that this is the one that you go like, okay, this might be helpful in the final exam. Okay, but you go like, but I want to add some more stuff to the spreadsheets, add some of my own annotations and whatnot. You got a few options. You can go to File, you can go to Make a Copy, and then you have your own Google Sheet copy that is based on mine. And then once you have that, you can add additional, you can annotate it any way you want, and then you print it out, okay? Or you can print it out first, okay? And then you use your pencil or pen, and then you highlight and you explain things on your own, okay? So that's a resource that is available to you. If you want to print out something like this, you just type Control P. It will automatically bring up the print menu, and then you can customize the print menu here, and you can change it from landscape to portrait mode. You can also change the margins, a bunch of you can do a lot of stuff. Okay, when you're printing it out, it will print to a PDF, which means you can now combine a bunch of PDFs and then print them all into a single pile of paper. So you have a lot of options over there. Okay, but the focus is not so much to memorize the traces or to do pattern recognition, but to truly understand the mechanism. In other words, can you explain to a second person when you have a function call like this and you have an argument like this and you have a parameter like that, how do you specify all the columns? Can you explain it to a second person? If you can, that's a good sign. But if you cannot, and you just go like, okay, I know the pattern is going to look like this, but I don't know why it looks like that. That means you might need to spend some more time to think about the mechanism itself. So in the lecture, I try my best to explain exactly what the mechanism is, but I use very specific terms. Okay, I differentiate the term of a function definition and the invocation of a function. Those two are separate concepts. I differentiate between the term called a argument versus a parameter because they are related, but they are also different concepts. So that means when you're listening to me talk about things, you have to listen very carefully to see what term or what terms I'm using in the video because that is actually significant. All right. Any other resources you can use for this class? Yes. Yeah, well, I haven't tried that. I have not tried that. So if you want to give that a try, you can do it on your own Gemini. You can make your own jam. So have I talked about how to make your own jam? Nope. Okay, so this is how you can do it. Huh? Okay. So the way you make your own jam, depending on how annoying you want your own jam to look like. So the way you do your own jam is to get the reading material first, okay? So every single piece of reading material in this class, if you go all the way to the end, okay, let me get this out of the way first. There we go. So if you click on this link here, you'll view the source document. I'll just kind of put it in a new tab, okay, so I don't lose the original. So it will bring you to a page like this, which is just a GitHub page. You don't need an account to get to this page, so you don't even need to sign up for a GitHub account. Once you get to this page, go to this little tab here, click on Download Raw File. Okay, so click that. It will ask you to download the file. I would download the file with the module name itself or give it some meaningful name. Okay. So this one I personally just use the module number, 0461.md. Okay. And you can do this for all of the reading material. Okay. So you basically go back to where's my mouse pointer? There we go. Oh, there we go. There we go. So this is one, okay? So I go back to here. So let's just say that I want a whole bunch, okay? Because we are be you're being tested on all the material after the second exam, so everything about function and structures will be in the scope. Okay, so we have functions, we have arrays, and no, arrays not on its own, but array in the context of function call would be in the scope of the final exam. And then so we'll roll back here. Okay, so we look at the other notes here. So everything that has a link in it is basically a link to a reading material. So let's just say that we also want this one. Okay, so we look at this one and you do the same thing. Okay, you go all the way to the end and then you download that file. I think for this class, you can use a easier approach, but I would describe an approach that works, for even for to handle a lot more files. Okay, so I got two files downloaded, but you can repeat this process and get every single file downloaded. Okay, so all the reading material that you have access to, they are all licensed to allow you to do something like this. So don't worry about your copyright notices because you don't have to, the license allows you to do it. So then what you do is you concatenate the two files. Okay, whatever number of files you can download, like 20 files like this, just concatenate. Okay, does everybody understand what concatenate means? No? Okay, it means just putting them together. Just copy one after another. Okay, so you can use something like a notepad to do it. Okay, that's the easiest way to do it. So I'll show you guys how to do it. I'll just get to one of the notepad window here. I go to new, okay, and then I open the file that I just downloaded. Okay, so this would be this file. Okay, this is what an MD file looks like. Okay, Markdown is just like plain text with some funky stuff going on. Okay, but it's not too difficult. So you just do a copy and then go to, oh, I cannot remember where. Okay, let me close off some of the stuff that I don't need anymore. Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and open a new file, paste it here. So this is the end. Okay, scroll all the way to the end here. Okay, make sure that you go all the way to the end, and then you open the other file. Then you open up the second module. Okay, so you open. This is the second one. Okay, Control A, select all. Control C, copy. Go back to the one where you have pasted everything, and then go to the very end here and then paste again. Okay, so that's concatenation. Yep. And if you have 10 files like this, you can concatenate all 10 files. These are not large files to begin with, so you can concatenate like 10 of these and it hardly makes a dent on your hard drive space. Okay, so now what you do is you save the concatenated version. So when you save the concatenated version, you can save it as text notes, okay, or whatever, okay, however you want to name it. But you do want to have the extension of MD because it tells Gemini Gem what kind of a file it is, okay. So you click that, okay. Now you go to Gemini. So you go to Gemini and you all have access to Gemini if you sign in to apps.losrios.edu first with a student ID. Then you type the URL, okay, gemini.google.com. You have access to Gemini, okay. So now what you do is you go to this little symbol here. You go to not new chat, okay. You go to gems. You go to gems and then you say you just want to start a new gem. Okay. So now you can say, okay, name it whatever. Okay. This one is just for your purpose. Okay. To identify the gem. So you can just name it as CISP 300. And then the description is also not super important. Okay. You can just type your CISP 300 to the bot. Okay. The instructions, on the other hand, can be useful. Okay, so one thing I would definitely do is name the file. Okay, go ahead and upload the file first. Click on this add symbol here, and then upload the finished file, which is what was it? Um, Text notes, right? So we upload the file first. Okay, so whatever file you have created, or you can have additional files too. Okay, so if you have been taking notes yourself and you have a digital file for your notes, you can also upload it. Okay, the most important part is to tell Gemini what this file is and when to use it. So you can now go back to instructions And you can now name the file. Okay, you can say um, the file or the knowledge file text notes dot md captures or is a concatenation of all the, not all, obviously, in this case, because I only include two files, right? So you can say it's a concatenation of reading material of CISP 300, and you can also name the class to, because the more context you give Gemini, the better it knows how to use the context. Okay, but the first thing is you have to tell it which knowledge file contains what. Okay, so that it knows when to refer to it. Okay, and then you also want to specify the role, okay, of what the AI is going to play. So that depends on how you want to do it, okay? So if you just want it to be a free tutor thing and just answer some of your questions and whatnot, you can just say that you are, so because you is referring to the AI, okay? So the GPT is quote unquote you. So you can say you are a tutor of CISP 300, the user being that's you as a student, okay? The student will ask questions about the material of this class, okay? And that's kind of the minimum that you want to do, okay, with a Gemini Jam. And the more you can customize the instructions. Okay, so if you don't want it to give you like the answer right away, and instead it would kind of lead you step by step to the correct answer, I can give you the long prompt, okay, to do that. But if you just want it to be, okay, I just need to look up something, or I need you to explain something to me, then you can just do something like that. Okay, this is Grammarly nagging me about my grammar. Okay, so that's okay, fine, fixed it. There we go. So we save everything, and now we can start a chat with the tutor. So we can now ask the tutor and say, okay, explain to me what is passing by reference. Something like that, okay? So we'll see how it answers that particular question. I don't even remember whether I uploaded the notes for that. I think I did, or maybe not. I cannot remember. Yep. It will explain it using my material. Yeah, so it might be able to do the trace too, so I'm gonna ask it to do it the same thing. So in this case, it's okay, well, it does use the sample program that I was using. Interesting. Okay. Ah, see, it asked me, would you like me to walk you through the full trace table for that init a cat example to see exactly how the columns are updated? So all you have to do is to say yes, because it understands the context of your prompt, which is just yes, because it knows that it left the last response with a question. Okay. So now we'll see. Okay. I haven't really tried this, so but from my other classes, like CISP 310 and 440, my students, seem to think that, Gemini can be quite helpful this way. All right, so let's see. Let's check out the answer. Set up the columns. Okay, it only describe it, but it doesn't. Would you explain? Okay, so now I'm gonna ask it. Um, can you present the actual trace table? Okay, there we go. Because it refers to the columns, but it doesn't really quite give me the whole table. Oh, okay, there we go. Not bad. So I haven't really checked, the result here. When you see 2D, that's a strikeout. Okay, that's also a markdown thing. So when you see 2D, that means striking out the actual content between the 2D. So there you go. You can give it programs too. Okay, if you want to quote unquote train it, you can say this is the code that Tag talked about in class. Give it the actual code, and then go to the spreadsheet. Download the spreadsheet as a CSV, as a comma separated value file. Upload that spreadsheet and go like this is Tag's trace of this algorithm. so that the AI understands how the trace corresponds to the source code. So give it a few examples like that. Then you can give it like a program that it may not have seen before, and ask what would the trace look like in this case. You can do it either way. So you can so with regard to the examples. So one thing you can do is to go back to the jam. Okay, so you can now go back to the jam. I think it was this one that we were working with. So what you can do is you can upload programs. You can upload up to 10 files. That's the problem. Okay, you're limited to only 10 files, but you can upload like the C code and then upload the trace. And then in the instruction, you can say, this file is the trace of that program. This file is the trace of that program. So that way, the AI would automatically make an association between, okay, this is the code, this is the trace, this is the code, this is the trace. And it will start to notice the patterns so that when you ask it to trace a program that it had not seen before, it would know the standard. Like, okay, this is the convention, this is how we set up the columns, and so on. Yep. All right. So I do encourage you guys to learn how to use AI in a productive way, such as this, okay? Because if you learn how to prompt the AI and know what language to use in what context, that is going to be helpful to you to land a job later on. Because all employers, okay, looking for software developers, they all expect employees to know how to use AI in a productive way. So unlike some of the other professors on this campus who basically say, do not use AI at all, I do encourage people to use AI, but in a productive way. So don't try to use AI to do all your homework. Do your own homework, but use AI to help with the learning that you need in order to get the homework done. You still need to do the homework as an assessment to see whether you understand the concepts or not. Okay, so we are running out of time. Okay, but I hope this is helpful. Okay, excellent. All right, so I still have office hours. Okay, just in case you guys need to talk to me, I still have my office hours. Yeah.